Today's occurrence happens in Russia, and what is known to be one of their deadliest club fires in history. When clubgoers entered a nightclub on the night of December 4th, they went in to have a good time. The club was celebrating its 8th anniversary, and a few hundred people had been invited to attend the party. It was freezing cold outside, but in true Russian fashion, the weather didn't stop them from partying. There were choreographed dances to American music, and everyone was enjoying themselves. What the clubgoers didn't know was that just after midnight, the building they were in would catch fire, and the help that hundreds of victims would need wouldn't show for hours. I'm Tatiana Bunch, and this is the story of the Lame Horse Fire. On the night of December 4th, 2009, a nightclub whose name translates to Lame Horse in English was celebrating their 8th anniversary. The club was located in Perm, 720 miles east of Moscow, and 282 people had been invited to attend the anniversary party. There were choreographed dances to American music, flashing lights, the works. The vibe was definitely pre-bottle service nightlife, and the party continued on after midnight. Now December 5th. Around 1 a.m., there were around 300 people in the club, most of them watching performance artists doing a dance to a medley of music, including We Will Rock You by Queen. Some dancers were wearing all white and breakdancing, others were doing different dances, and they had fireworks and sparklers going off around them. Most people in attendance were watching them perform while sitting around small wooden tables. At some point during the dance, a fire broke out. At first, no one really moved or seemed alarmed by it. Maybe they couldn't differentiate the fire from everything else going on, or maybe they figured it wasn't a big deal and someone would put it out quickly. The fire continued to build in the wooden branches and plastic decorating the ceiling until the smoke caused it to catch someone's attention. Then a host casually yelled, "Ladies and gentlemen, guests of the club, we are on fire. Please leave." At first, everyone got up kind of nonchalant, as you should during a fire, so you don't cause a panic. But the ceiling was on fire, and it had been burning for a bit before it was even noticed. Now, it took seconds to spread. Some people close to the fire had already started to leave before the announcement was made. They were kind of quickly walking towards the exit, but as everyone else left and opened the doors, letting in large amounts of oxygen, the wooden decorations that were starting to catch fire all around quickly went ablaze and continued to spread. The decorations catching fire led to more smoke, and soon the building was filled with it. People panicked and started shoving and pushing to get the people in front of them to move faster so they could get out. One woman, who I'll call O, said that there was only one exit, so people started breaking down doors to try and get out. O couldn't see anything because everything was in smoke. Another witness reported that the fire spread like the club was a dry haystack. She barely avoided being stampeded when the panic started because there was only one way out. One eyewitness said that when they went towards the entrance to the hall, they could see the fire on the ceiling and smoke. The light bulbs had started to crack, and people were flying through the door so forcefully that the witness was pushed back into a small hall with a coat room. At that point, someone opened a back door. It was the staff exit, and it led to the courtyard of the building where the entrance is. This created a draft that instead of some fire and a ton of smoke, the oxygen fed the fire to the point where it burst through the door, leading to the hall and hit the heads of the people trying to get out. It sounds like it was a flashover, but I wasn't able to confirm if that's actually what happened. From that point on, the eyewitness couldn't see anything and had to feel using their hands to find the exit and lean against the backs of anyone in front of them. The eyewitness said that they had to go through a narrow place near the fence and 2 doors, but that was really all the description they could give because they said, quote, "Visibility, I repeat, was 0, end quote. Those able to leave the club on their own left coughing and struggling to see and breathe. Some were suffering from burns on their bodies, but they would be the lucky ones. Another witness reported that only a few people managed to get out on their own, around 60 lucky ones. Pretty much everyone who made it outside immediately collapsed from almost suffocating from the smoke. The last person to make it out on their own was that witness's friend. His friend didn't have any clothes on, but he did have a sweater wrapped around his head. The friend is believed to be pretty much the last person who got out, not seriously injured, but he was covered in soot and coughing violently. Some people managed to get back inside to pull others out once they caught their breath. According to one anonymous clubgoer, after they left the club, they didn't see any firemen or emergency vehicles for about 20 minutes. When the firemen did arrive on scene, they broke some windows to send water onto the fire inside. They also pulled out a few people, but they were just laid on the asphalt outside next to the others already pulled out, and no one provided immediate aid to them after that. The people were left lying on the ground for up to an hour and a half, and it was about 3 degrees Fahrenheit or -16 Celsius outside. There didn't appear to be any paramedics that had arrived due to the fire, but there were 2 ambulances nearby. The 2 ambulances weren't able to get closer than 164 feet or 50 meters to the club because of all the parked cars and fire trucks surrounding the lame horse. 2 people found a man lying under the trees off to the side. When they checked him, he still had a pulse. So they picked him up and took him to the ambulances that were stationed at a crossroad. Allegedly, the first responders didn't even bother looking at him, although there were only 2 people in the vehicle. The guy asked the paramedics why they were just sitting there, and they told him that they hadn't actually been given any orders. Now, I'm not sure if the witness was saying they took 6 or 7 people and left, or that they could have taken that amount and left with only the guy they rescued, but the witnesses didn't see any ambulance come after that. Relatives rushed to the scene as news went around the local area that the club was on fire. The locals were running around looking for people they knew and calling their phones and yelling their names. None of them even wore coats because they ran out of their homes so quickly that it didn't even cross their minds to grab them. Random people driving by would see what was happening and take people to the hospital in their cars. People in very nice Mercedes and other luxury vehicles would drive up and say things like, "Load them, we'll take them away." They didn't mind getting the inside of their cars dirty. They just wanted to help. So even though the clubgoers themselves had pulled out most people and the firemen pulled out a couple more, no one helped to provide medical aid to those who were brought out. The only way they got help initially was by people driving by and taking them to the hospital, or other survivors taking them. One survivor ended up driving to a medical center with someone he rescued, and he asked the guard where the appropriate department to take him was. He had to go find the entrance for the admission area himself, and he knocked on the door to get in, but someone only looked out and said that they would come out soon, but no one ever came out. So the guy took the man that he rescued from the fire inside himself, and then he drove back to the lame horse. By the time he made it back to the club, police and officials were on scene, and everything had started to be cordoned off. He went to ask a fireman how he could help, but he felt like there were enough men there at that point that his assistance wasn't needed for what they were doing. Instead, he chose to find injured people who were well enough to be taken home and not need emergency assistance. Most of the people he had helped to bring out earlier were already covered on the ground. Allegedly, when the police arrived after the firemen, they didn't offer much assistance. One survivor said, quote, "Then the police arrived after the firefighters. We, the victims ourselves, tried to somehow help those who are more seriously injured. And the police simply stood and watched. They even asked, 'What happened? At least take off your peacoats and hats and give them to the burnt people freezing in the cold.' No, it didn't even occur to them to start transporting the victims to the hospital in their cars. They stood and watched the people freeze, lying in the snow. People laid on the ground, certainly not less than an hour. Perhaps many died from this, from hypothermia. These were the most powerful impressions, people lying in the snow for an hour without any help." End quote. The Russian Prime Minister sent 2 planes that had what was needed to transport 19 serious burn victims to Moscow. They were actually like air hospitals. If you look at them, it literally looks like a hospital in the sky. Others were flown to St. Petersburg. The Russian president sent high-level government officials to Perm to help the victims and get a handle on the incident. They also started a criminal investigation because the people who started the fire, quote, "have neither brains nor conscience," end quote. A bit later in the day, on December 5th, there were reports of distraught relatives of the people suspected to not have survived visiting the local morgue for victim identification. Some family members were spotted crying or smoking while staring blankly at the list of the dead. There was also a hotline set up for people needing information about those injured and deceased. Pretty soon after the fire, rumors went around that had people believing that the fire was part of a terrorist plot. And the idea wasn't completely baseless, because this was the second consecutive Friday where a serious incident had happened in Russia. The Friday before this, 26 people were killed and 100 injured on an express train from Moscow to St. Petersburg. The train derailed, and investigators said that the train was blown up by insurgents who claimed responsibility. Now, there were people on Russia's internet that didn't believe that it was a terrorist. Some people believed that it was just an accident caused by something wrong with the rails or a mechanical failure. Later on, it was suggested that technical error could have been the cause, but still, the train incident caused some Russians to believe that there was a potential nationwide bombing plot. Fire investigators quickly got a lid on that, though, by saying that there weren't any links between the fire at the Lame Horse and what happened with the train. They went on to announce their intent to detain 4 people related to the fire. On December 7th, 2 days after the fire, was declared a national day of mourning, and it's the same day that the suspects were formally charged. One of the people accused, Anatoly Zak, the alleged co-owner of Lame Horse, left Perm after the fire and was eventually captured by Russian police. When he was caught, he had an Israeli passport on him, so it was believed he was trying to flee Russia via one of its international airports. Anatoly denied being a co-owner. He would go on to say that he was only owner investment-wise and not as far as actually overseeing the day-to-day operations. Svetlana Yefremova, the executive director, was charged. There was Oleg Fetkolov, the caretaker art director, who lost his wife, Yevgenia Fetkolova, on December 13th after complications from the fire. He was able to visit her remains in the morgue one last time before her funeral. And Sergei Derbenyov, the director of the pyrotechnics company that supplied what caused the fire. The first 3 people were charged with violations of fire safety rules, leading to the deaths of 2 or more people, with a maximum sentence of 7 years. Sergei was charged with negligent manslaughter of 2 or more people, which had a maximum sentence of 5 years. There was a 5th suspect, Alexander Totilino, the leaseholder of the premises and who owned 85% of the club shares. Alexander was badly injured in the fire with burns on more than 80% of his body. He was taken to a clinic in Moscow and died on December 9th, before charges were brought against him. On December 8th, the Russian Prime Minister stated that local and federal officials were responsible in some part for the fire. At this point, the death toll is 118 people. The investigation would reveal a lot. To start, the Lame Horse had been operating under forged documents. The registration certificate for the club actually belonged to a residential building extension in another city in the same region, Lisva. So the club's literal existence wasn't actually documented, legally anyway. The technical passport of the Lame Horse was forged too. That document explains the building's layout and compliance with regulations. It was prepared in 2007, and it claims that the club's area was 4,800 square feet when in actuality, it was 7,200 square feet, or 670 square meters. It ended up being that size because the owners did an unauthorized expansion between 2004 and 2006. There was no official inspection of that construction work, to the point where there were forged signatures on the Lame Horse's documentation, so that started an entirely different investigation under Russian criminal law for forgery of official documents. Inspecting the premises after the fire revealed that there were many critically important changes that were made different to the original plan that the club was given permission to implement. Buildings were supposed to have large windows so that people could escape. Large windows that were on the building were bricked. The extension wall built during their illegal construction period failed to have even a single window on it. The club was also not supposed to have more than 50 visitors inside at a time, so there were just 2 exits for the hundreds more people than were even allowed inside. And most were unaware of the staff door, which is why almost everyone tried to force themselves out of the main entrance. So no emergency exits, no fireproofing. The hallways were extremely tight, which made everything worse. And, allegedly, a significant portion of club employees were working illegally. For a long time, they hadn't had a single inspection at the Lame Horse nightclub to see if any original violations had even been fixed. Ironically, or tragically, the next fire inspection that the club was supposed to have was meant to happen on December 7th, 2 days after the fire. Chief Fire Safety Inspector of the local fire safety authority, Vladimir Muhudinev, was charged with negligence on duty, leading to the death of 2 or more people, which has a maximum sentence of 7 years. The court ordered his arrest on December 11th, but Vladimir felt sick in the courtroom and was hospitalized. The head of the Russian Emergencies Ministry suspended 7 officials of the State Fire Supervision Service for the Perm territory because the club was given permission from the relevant services to have the party, even though they had several violations. It was also revealed that the name of the club hadn't been registered by any tax authority, so taxes weren't being paid. The formal investigation wrapped up on June 4th, 2010, and indictments were issued to Svetlana, Anatoly, Oleg, Sergei, and his son Igor, because he allegedly lit the fireworks, and Vladimir. Anatoly, Svetlana, and Oleg had their charges reclassified to the production, storage, transportation, or sale of goods, or providing a service without following safety regulations, which led to the death of more than 2 people, with a maximum sentence of 10 years. And Anatoly was also indicted for tax evasion, but that would be dropped if he paid back the taxes and penalties he owed. He also had his property seized due to charges against him by victims of the fire. It's believed 18 pieces of property belonged to him, including houses and apartments, and real estate properties that he would lease out. He also owned or had interest in 28 commercial entities. Vladimir was hit with an additional 2 counts of misuse of authority because investigators found a 5,000 rubles gift certificate from one of the local alcohol shops in his office. Allegedly, the alcohol shop did not fit fire safety standards, but he still gave them a permit. 5,000 rubles is the equivalent of $48, so form your own opinions with that one. The other co-worker of the Lame Horse was accused, but not in custody until August 31st, 2010. His name was Konstantin Murin, and an international arrest warrant had to be issued for him. Anatoly couldn't get away, but it sounds like he did, because he was arrested in Barcelona, Spain. The trial for the people indicted later began on September 20th, 2010, and 304 people who were injured and relatives of the people who died filed civil suits against everyone accused for 2.5 billion rubles, or $83 million. The trial was postponed several times due to the people accused claiming innocence or asking to be excused from appearing in the courtroom due to health problems, mental and physical. And the people charged kept changing lawyers, and then one lawyer was hospitalized to give birth. Like, it was really a lot. I'm not saying people were exaggerating or faking it, but there was a suspicious amount of coincidences. In the end, Konstantin was convicted in May of 2012 of providing services not compliant with safety requirements committed by an organized group by prior agreement, which negligently led to the deaths of 2 or more people. He pled guilty to the charges so he wouldn't have to go through the long trial, and his maximum sentence was automatically reduced by 1/3 because of that, so he was given 6.5 years in prison. He was also ordered to pay the equivalent of $1.9 million in compensation to the victims. In April of 2013, Anatoly was given 9 years and 10 months in prison. According to reports, relatives of the victims actually groaned when the judge allegedly said that Anatoly deserved leniency because he was a father and that he alerted authorities to the fire and helped rescue efforts. Svetlana was given 4 years, Oleg received 6 years, Igor was given 4 years and 10 months, Sergei was given 5 years, and Vladimir was fined the equivalent of $676. His sentence was reduced due to the statute of limitations on his charges. They also ended up indicting 2 fire inspectors of the Regional State Fire Supervision Service, Dmitry Roslyakov and Natalia Prokopieva, for negligence of duty. They were given 5 and 4 years in penal settlement colonies, respectively, and banned from holding public office for 3 years. If you know anything about the penal colonies, you know that's a tough break, for lack of better words. There are facilities that prisoners are sent to serve sentences while doing compulsory labor in remote places like Siberia. They've evolved from their original practice of exiling convicts to underpopulated regions for forced labor, and they were expanded under Stalin into the Gulag system, which detained millions of people. But today I believe they have communal living quarters. The punishment is labor-focused, and it's very strict, discipline-wise. You usually hear about them when people are talking about alleged human rights abuses. 156 people were killed in the Lame Horse Club fire due to burns and smoke inhalation, with about 100 more injured. This fire was the deadliest in Russia since 1991, when the Soviet Union dissolved. This fire happened because of fireworks being used indoors, but also because of a lack of safety regulations being followed. After it happened, there was a ban on fireworks at upcoming New Year's and Christmas festivities, and the president ordered a review of fire safety regulations. By mid-December, 54 nightclubs and cafes in Moscow alone had their activity suspended because surprise inspections at over 400 facilities exposed safety violations in those businesses. The violations were the usual thing you hear: a lack of fire alarms, construction materials blocking walkways, some places had bars on the windows, exits being blocked, and at the time that this happened, Russia had around 18,000 deaths a year from fires. That's several times the per capita rate in other Western countries, including America. That's not to say that other countries, including the US, don't have incredibly deadly fires and club fires that I will eventually get to. But for a long time, their fire record has been considered terrible in Russia. On average, around 35 people daily would be killed in fires around this time. And while it's still an issue, especially wildfires, it sounds like they have tried to implement changes since, although it's hard to tell as updated information on it is obviously not the easiest to find and fact check. But stay safe and happy holidays. I'll be back next Thursday. All sources can be found at occurrencepod.com, which is linked in the show notes, along with any other relevant information.